I'm here.
Okay, good morning, Avram. Good morning to everybody. Boker Tov. Today's daf is daf Samach Daled in Yevmot, as we learned for Forshlan for Yosef Azriel ben Chaim Michal and Elazar ben Reuma. Says the Mishnah on daf Samach Daled. Nasi Isha v'shoymo eser shana v'lo yolda ein r'shoy levato. We learned before that the last couple of days that you have to be Mekan mitzvah free of the mitzvah pruvu seats incumbent on men to Mekan mitzvah pruvu, and machlokas what that mitzvah was. Generally, we hold like Basil, you have to have a boy and a girl. Now, and they have to be able to propagate further them having children. Obviously, you can only do so much, right? You can only do what you could do. You can't control other people, and nobody wants to marry you. That's another problem, right? But that's the idea here. So let's say he married her, and he was married for 10 years. We'll see and you lived in Eretz Yisrael, and he didn't have any children. So he still cannot say, well, I tried and give up. No, he shouldn't give up. What should he do? Take another wife, or in a situation where you're only allowed to have one wife because polygamy is forbidden, or you just choose not to have two wives at the same time. So divorce her and take another wife. We'll see how this is learned out. So a person's supposed to give it a chance for 10 years. If he didn't have, obviously this is if he didn't have children yet. If he had children, he's not mechuyev to have more. He's supposed to. It's a good idea. We said you should never stop. But at least he's Mekayim the mitzvah. Once he's Mekayim the mitzvah, he's not obligated to take another wife or to divorce this one and then take another wife. Girsha, let's say he divorced her. Can she marry somebody else? Or you might say, well, listen, she's a barren woman. No, if he divorces her, she's allowed to marry somebody else. And we don't assume that she's barren because maybe he was the problem. We don't know. And the second guy that she marries could also stay there 10 years with him, 10 years. And if the second person needs to become the mitzvah approve and hasn't, and he gave her 10 years, the same thing would apply to him. He should divorce her or take another wife. But it only says she can get married a second time. Let's say she didn't have children from the first husband or the second husband. That apparently from the Mishnah is mashmat zechazaka, and a person who needs to have children shouldn't marry her anymore. We'll say the same thing, the idea of a woman whose husbands die all the time. She's called an isha katlanit, and you're not allowed to marry her. But we'll talk about halacha l'maisa is a little bit different, but that's the general idea. So from the Mishnah's mashma, that if she got married to two different men and neither one of them could have children, each one of them stayed with her in Eretz Yisrael for 10 years and didn't have children, she shouldn't marry again. That's what's mashma Mishnah. Let's say though she didn't have child, but she did miscarry, so she was pregnant. Then Mona Mishashapil, you count either in the first marriage or the second marriage. You count from the time that she miscarried, because then she is capable of getting pregnant. So the 10 years only counts 10 years of total barrenness where she didn't have any children. So the Brisa expands a little bit on the Mishnah's usual. If a person got married and he stayed with her for 10 years, Yotzi should divorce her. It doesn't mean, again, because maybe he was unworthy of building a family from her. Now, this does not mean, the Mishnah said, Rashi said on the Mishnah, he's got to take another wife. So this is very common. We had a case here. We always talk about the case here in the neighborhood that a person in Persia was married for a number of years, had no children. He took a second wife, and he came to Eretz Yisrael in the early 50s with both wives, and they both lived right over here. A lot of screaming. Never mind. Anyway, so the point here is though that he should divorce her. It's not mashma that he has to divorce her. He could take a second wife. He could take a second wife. The price doesn't mean that he has to divorce her. He could stay with her. But if he divorces her, he could stay with her, take another wife. But if he divorces her, he has to give the ksuba, because who says it's her fault? Maybe it's his fault. Maybe he wasn't unworthy of having children with her. And therefore, where do we get this 10-year business from? What's this 10-year term? There's an allusion to it in the Chumash, because the pasuk says, 10 years after Avram Avinu lived in Eretz Canaan, because originally he was in Padan, to teach, then he took Hagar as a wife. And Sarah didn't have any children. Why does it say after 10 years of living in Eretz Yisrael? Just say after 10, some years later, Sarah didn't have any children, he married Hagar, to tell me that living in Chutz La'aretz does not count, right? What does that mean? And Rashi tells us, take a look at Rashi here. Is a good Rashi. Rashi, as opposed to the other ones. Some are what we call more geschmack, Take a look first, Rashi and the Gemara. Volhager. Why didn't he live? Why didn't he marry her earlier? Sarah was barren for many years. Until he came to Eretz Canaan. Why didn't he take over there? Shahayu Shanim Rubas Padan. He was many years in Padan. Doesn't count. The years of Chutz doesn't count. Dilma Mishum Avon Chutz La'aretz Heimakurim. Maybe they're barren because of the sin of living in Chutz La'aretz. See that? Rashi says it's a sin. Avon Chutz. Even though where did Rashi live? Right? The Rambam said the same thing. I'm sitting here every day in Egypt. I'm a sinner. Right? They're sinners. We're Zochah to be here. Yeah. Correct. That's correct. It only counts for the 10 years in Israel. Not just if he came from Chutz La'aretz now. You have to be 10 years in Israel. Guess what it says? We see it from Avram. After 10 years in which he lived in Israel, only then he took Hagar. Teach you that Chutz La'aretz doesn't count. So therefore, what we're saying is, if there's some other reason that we could attribute her barrenness to, for example, they lived in Chutz La'aretz, or some other reason, for example, let's say she was sick. She was sick. She was in the hospital. I'm sorry, chalahu, if he was sick. Let's say they were sick. If he was sick or she was sick, you can attribute the barrenness to something. Or they were in jail. One of them was in jail. Was in jail for a long time. Usually, well, not today, but usually used to be that if you were in jail, there were no conjugal visits. So you could, those don't count. It's got to be 10 clean years in Israel. So why do you learn out from Avram Avinu? Because it says 10 years after he came to Eretz Israel, then he took Hagar. Why don't you look in Yitzchak to Siv? How old was Yitzchak when he got married to Rivka? 40. Pasuk says that. When did he give birth to the twins, Yaakov and Esav? When he was 60. So why don't you say 20 years? You see, he was 20. Yitzchak was only in Eretz Israel. He never left Israel, right? So why do you want it from Avram? Why don't you give him 20 years like Yitzchak? Yitzchak was 20 years there. Yitzchak is a different reason. He was barren. Yitzchak himself was barren. So maybe Avram was also barren, as we'll see. They were all barren. It was all Nisim that they gave birth. Why don't you look there? So it's like this. Why did the Torah tell us, Rashi explains, why did the Torah tell us that Avram took another wife 10 years after he lived in Israel? To show us that that's the rule. 10 years in Israel, clean, without being in jail or sick or anything like that. That's the rule. If you live 10 years in Eretz Israel and you didn't have children, take another wife. Fine. But by Yitzchak, there's a different reason why it told us that he was 60 years old. Not to teach us that from 40 to 60 they were barren, which it was the truth, that he got married at 40, didn't have children until 60. But for a different Russia, like Rav why do we tell us Shmuel was 137 years old when he died, right? And when he died. And he died at the time that Esav took his niece for a wife, whatever, all that says at the end of Toldos. Why did it tell us yesterday? To tell us how old Yaakov was. Meaning, right? Because we say like this, the Rashi alludes to it over here, Sigmar McGill Daf Yomi, one of the last Rashis, the big Rashi at the end of Toldos, that why does it tell us that Yitzchak was 6 years old? Not because to tell us that you can wait 20 years. That we saw from Avram. Yitzchak, there's a different reason. Because by Yitzchak telling us that Yitzchak was 60 years old when Yaakov and Esav were born, from there we learn out the whole computation that Yosef learned 14 years in Yeshiva of Shem Ve'eber, and therefore he wasn't punished. He was punished for the years that he stayed away from his father and parents. Yaakov, I'm sorry. Yaakov was punished. Yaakov was punished. Yosef. It's also because from Yosef, we learn out from Yosef and Yishmael. Because Yishmael, we say Yishmael, how old was Yishmael compared to Yitzchak? 14 years old. He was 14 years older, right? He was 100, one was 80. So he was 14 years older. So by telling us that Yitzchak was 60 years old when the boys were born, how old was Yishmael at that point? 74, because he was 14 years older, right? So he was 74 years old. And at a certain point, when we see from there that when he was 74 and he died at the time that Yishmael died at the time that Yaakov and Esav left home. Remember, Yaakov went to Lavan, right, and Esav went to Yishmael. So at that point, Yaakov and Esav were 63 years old, right? Why? because if Yishmael was 74 when his brother Yitzchak gave birth to the twins, Yaakov and Esau, right? 74, and he died at 137. So if you do the math from 137 to 74, that shows you that, right, that when they were born, that shows you that when Yaakov went to Lavan, he was 63, because it was 63 years old from 137 to take away 74 from 137 is 63 years old. So from there we know that that Yaakov was 63 years old when he left his parents' home. And then you figure out the years. It was 14 years by Lavan, and 14 years by Lavan till Yosef was born. Then Yosef went down to Mitzrayim 30 years, and 9 years until Yaakov came down there. When Yaakov came down to Mitzrayim, what did the Paro say? How old are you? Kama yemei shnei chayecha. And tell him I'm 130 years old. But if you figure out the years from 63, from time Yaakov was 63 when he left home at 63, and the years he was at in Lavan's house, and then the years the years that Yosef was in Mitzrayim, and then the years that he was taken away. Yosef when he came to Mitzrayim was 30. When you figure it all out, you're missing 14 years. So from there they learn out that Yaakov was learning in the yeshiva for 14 years, and he wasn't punished for those years that he didn't keep it up. So all that, in other words, the reason why we're told that Yitzchak was 60 years old when it's born, not to tell you that you can wait 20 years and not be worried about being barren. The reason he was 60 years old is to tell us that if he was 60 years old when they were born, that means that Yishmael was 74 when the twins were born, 74. And we know when Yishmael died from the pasuk at the end of Toldos, and the pasuk says he was 137. So we figured this all out to show us that Yaakov learned in the yeshiva for 14 years. That's why it's, in other words, by Avram, why did it tell us that he took Hagar after 10 years? To tell us that 10 years is the rule. 10 years in Eretz Yisrael is the rule. But by Yitzchak, there was a different reason for. There was no reason to tell us that he was 60 years old when the kids were born, only to figure this all out. That Yishmael was 137 when he died, and we know he was 74 when the twins were born. Why? Because Yitzchak, his brother was 14 years younger, and he was 60. So therefore, if he was 60 when if Yitzchak was 60 when his twins were born, Yishmael was 74. To figure out how many years Yaakov was, figure out all his chronology of Yaakov's life to show us that Yaakov was 14 years in the yeshiva. Rav Yitzchak. So Rav Yitzchak says this now. Rabbi Yitzchak, Tana. Yitzchak he was barren. Shnemar be'etar Yitzchak l'Hashem l'noch bishto. Yitzchak prayed opposite his wife. It doesn't say he prayed for his wife. Wife is barren, you pray for her. No. Ela l'nochach, he opposite her. Malamed sheshnei makom, that they were both barren. Yitzchak was barren, and so was Rivka. Yochi, why does it say Vayesor lo? Hashem listened, Hashem hearkened to him. But he should have listened to both. They should have listened to both of them. Rivka and Yitzchak both praying. Rivka was at Tzadekes bat Russia. So the tefillah of a tzaddik ben tzaddik is greater than the tefillah of a tzaddik ben Russia. Yitzchak was the son tzaddik and the son of a tzaddik. Rivka was not. So Hashem listened more to his prayer, but they both prayed for fertility. Why did God make our forefathers, Avram and Sarah and Yitzchak and Rivka? Why did he make them barren? Hashem desires the tefillas. He wants us to pray to him. Why are the tefillas of tzaddikim comparable to a pitchfork? It says vayetar, right? Like a pitchfork. Just like the pitchfork turns over the produce in the field from one place to another. That's what you do with the pitchfork. It turns over the gzeira, so to speak, the rules of God from anger, midas regros, midas rachmanas. And as the tefillas of tzaddikim is like a pitchfork turns over Hashem's gzeiros from anger to mercy. Amar Vami, the last line on the page. Not only were they barren, but they were both of unspecified sex. Their sexual genitals were not visible at birth. Avram and Sarah wrote to Yushanemar. Habita, the pasuk says, this is the pasuk in Yeshaya and Alf. It's the end of the Haftorah of Akev. Habitu el surch tzavasram. Look at the mountain, at the rock that hewn you, that from which you were hewn. Vel mikvas born across them, and from the hole in the pit that you were that we were dug out from, meaning referring to Avram and Sarah's sources to their genitals. Because the next pasuk says, "Habitu al Avram avichem." Then he says, "Who are we talking about? Look at Avram, your father, and Sarah, who bore you. Look at them." In other words, you see over here that they were, so to speak, hewn out. It was a rock, and it was hewn out. It was uncovered, like their sexual organs were originally not visible. Sorry, not only was she barren, she didn't have any womanly characteristics at all. In other words, she didn't have breasts, she didn't have anything, she didn't have a womanly voice, etc. She was what we call an islandess, incapable of having children. How do you know that? She never says, Vati Sarah Akara. Sarah was barren. Ain la balad. Why does it say ain la balad? It says she was barren. That's good enough. Afilu base balad ain la. She didn't even have a womb. She was wombless, right? She had nothing. Amar Rav Yehuda braid Rav Shmuel bar Shilas mishmei derav, right? I'm going to tell the Rav Yehuda, the son of Rav Shmuel bar Shilas, said in the name of Rav. This business about the 10 years was only in the olden days when they lived, 150 years, they lived 175 years. Then 10 years was a good amount, right? But now in modern times, when people don't live that long, they don't live as long. Less years. Give them just 2.5 years together. If they don't have children, if they're 2.5 years in Eretz Yisrael, he should take another wife, right? That's enough for 3 pregnancies. The 3 pregnancies, 2.5 years is how many months? 30 months. You need 27 months for the pregnancies, and then a month for the Tumantara, to get pregnant, etc. So give them 2.5 years. Rav Nachman, no. Shalosh, give them 3 full years. Keneged Shosh Pidos, because like Keneged, opposite, or in remembrance of, or because of the 3 Pidos, when Hashem remembered the 3 great women on Rosh Hashanah. The Amar Ma'ab Rosh Hashanah Nifkilu Sarah Rachel V'Chana. That's what we read those parshas, right, on Rosh Hashanah. Sarah V'Chana were remembered by God on Rosh Hashanah. So give them 3 Rosh Hashanahs to remember. So give them 3 years. Amar Abba Lesson on claim. No, this business about 2.5 years, 3 years doesn't count. Why? Why do you say? Because that 10 years was only in biblical times, but not in modern times. Who said our Mishnah? Rebbe. Right, Rebbe was the author of Mishnah. But he made David in Moed already David only lived 70 years, and he said, even though Moshe Rabbeinu authored it, but David wrote it down. Yemeshua said Bem Shivim Shana. So even in our time, it was 70 years, and Rebbe gave him the Mishnah. Rebbe said, Nasi Shivim Eser Shanim Lo Yoldein Roshai. He's not talking about biblically, he's not giving us a history lesson. He's telling us halacha. So so the 10 years applies even today. So now the Gemara says, wait a minute. So why do you say why do you say he has to divorce her for 10 years and give her a ksuba? He has to pay her ksuba because she didn't do anything wrong. Maybe he's the one who's not capable of having children or is not worthy. So how do you say maybe she's the one? So and therefore, right, she should take a ksuba. The Gemara says, no, we're going to talk about who is a mitzvah period for the man or the women. Really, only the men, as we'll see. It's machlokas, but we posted it's only the men. Only men have a mitzvah. Since she doesn't have a mitzvah, lo miansha, she wouldn't be punished for that. In other words, for a man who has a mitzvah, so it's a punishment, he can't perform the mitzvah. For a woman, it's not. Obviously, women want to have children, but it's not the same. She doesn't have the same chiyuv, and therefore that wouldn't have been a punishment for her. So therefore, we assume that the 10 years is his fault, and he has to give her ksuba, unless, of course. Now, you might say she marries another time and doesn't have children. It turns out that it's hers. Does she have to give that to ksuba? No backseas when it comes to ksuba. She's got the ksuba, it's gone. Okay. Aini, is that really true? That what? That you assume that the problem is what? Is maybe his? Nasavitsi should get married. He should get married and have children. He said, if I would have been married, in other words, he was married once before and he had no children. He says, why don't you get married again? Had I married, how would they come out? I would have had from the first wife that I had. So it's mashma that it's his fault. He's not taking a second wife because he wasn't Zofa. So it's possible that it was his fault. It says, and there he's simply evading them, because we had before with Rav Sheshes 2 days ago. A lot of these people became impotent because they didn't go to the bathroom. They had to urinate, and the Shiur went on for hours and hours, and they held it in, and that ruined their plumbing. Similarly, so he says he didn't want to tell him that he can't have children. He didn't want to tell him that he couldn't propagate anymore. So he just said, no, I would have been Zocha before. But the truth is, it could have been her fault or his fault. We don't know. Could have been his fault, could have been her fault. The fact that he didn't have from Kmais is not that he's blaming her. He said, if I would have been Zocha, I would have had from her. It's mashma that that the problem could very well be hers or his. We don't know. He's like, oh, you have a Kmaisa. So if you say that the problem is that she wouldn't be punished that way, only he would be punished. So who says that, why did he they told me I have children. He said, no, I would have had from the first one. It's mashma like, he's like, oh, I would have from the first one. Now that I didn't have, maybe it's my fault. Maybe it's my fault or maybe it's her fault. We don't know. So therefore, I'm not going to do anything. But the truth is, he just pushed them off. In other words, Rashi says, Eini va'amrulei. He's going on the Mishnah. Mishnah says he should marry another one. He's not going on that previous point simply about who's zoch or not. We said she's not punished because she doesn't have a mitzvah. But Rashi says here he's going on the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that he should marry another one. Maybe he wasn't zocha, and he should marry a second one. Here, Rav Abba Bar Zavda didn't want to take a second one. So it's not going on the blame, but simply saying, why did the Mishnah say you should stop and marry another one? Here he didn't take another one. That was because he knew he couldn't have children. Similarly, Rav Gidel, Yaakov Rav Gidel also became impotent from there. Rav Chelbo, Rav Huna, Rav Sheish, that was one we had the other day. Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, what happened was, he got sick with this sickness called Suchnesa, which is also a chola, which holding back the shetan, the urine, and a person, by holding it back, a person can become sterile. So what did they do? Tliyabars, they hung him up from a cedar tree to Beirav at the yeshiva. They never make kahutza yarka, and some greenish, like a green leaf, came out of him, emanated from him. In other words, he had this problem. They hung him up, and when they hung him up, this thing came out, emanated presumably from his organ. It came out of there, and as we'll see in a minute, that sort of healed the problem. Amar Vacha Bar Yaakov, this same Vacha Bar Yaakov said, Vacha Bar Yaakov got the sickness. He says, Shis and Sabi Avina, there were 60 elders with us in the yeshiva of Rav Huna. They all became sterile from the sitting in the yeshiva too long, from the Shiur. The barman, except for me, the Kaiman Afshar, because I was Mekaiman myself, meaning I did to myself, I fulfilled the pasuk of Achachma Tichya Ba'aleh. Pasuk says in Keheles that wisdom will make its owner live. So I used my brains. In other words, I figured out a way to seal the problem. No, it sealed to solve the problem by somehow hanging himself up they hung him up from a tree or something, and somehow this green stuff came out, and that solved his problem. Okay, Girsha Mutaris. Now we're going back to the issue. We said if he divorces her, right? After 10 years, we don't know. Maybe he wasn't so good to bill from her. Maybe it's presumably his fault. So she should marry you. You have to divorce her, marry somebody else, or since she doesn't mitzvah, she stays married to me. We said if you could take a second wife, if polygamy were in your locale, polygamy is okay, and you don't mind having two wives, take another wife. Otherwise, divorce her and she can marry somebody else. When you marry somebody else, give them 10 years too. But it doesn't say if in the second marriage doesn't 10 years pass, that she could get divorced and marry a third one. It's mashma. If she was married to two people, each of them for 10 years in Eretz Yisrael, and she had no children, she shouldn't get married again. That's what it's mashma in Mishnah. So the Gemara now explains that Gersha Muteres, right? Gersha should marry somebody else. Only a second one. Sheni Ainshli Shilo. It's mashma. But if she had two times, you're a loser. Not 3 strikes and you're out, but 2 strikes and you're out. That's what it's mashma. Sheni Ainshli Shilo. Masisim Manihos Mishnah like Rebbe. Famous machlokes Rebbe Mishum Galil is a chazaka 2 times or 3 times. So our Mishnah Mashma Rebbe, the Tanya, we see the same thing by a bris. Let's say a woman had a boy and she circumcised him and he died. Mila Rishna Mace, he died. He was a hemophiliac, the bleeder, and he died. She had another boy and baby eyes. He also died. Shlishi Lotum, she shouldn't circumcise the third one, Divrei Rebbe, because you saw the first 2 had a chazaka that they're going to die. They were bleeders. The third one you shouldn't do. Shmuel says Shlishi Toma Ravila Toma. You could do 3, not 4. In other words, a chazaka is only after 3 times, not 4. Today, of course, you have medical tests and you can see, but if you didn't have those tests, what is a chazaka? 2 times or 3 times? Rebbe says 2 times, like we saw in our Mishnah, and the same thing by bris milah, that if 2 babies died, you don't circumcise the third one. Shmuel says no, you have to wait for 3, and once you have 3, then it's established. I have a Tanya. We learn machlokes is the other way around. Rabbi says 3, Shmuel says 2. So we have to see which is the later one. In other words, later things were corrected, right? We always go by the later one, the later psak, the later version. They could have retracted their opinions and adopted the other one's opinion. In other words, clearly they had the opposite opinions and they each adopted the other one's opinion at the end. So which one was later? Tashma Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan actually explains was an Amora who lived at the end of Shmuel's days. Listen to this. There was a story with 4 sisters of Sipora in the town of Sipora. Now, we're going to see over here, it's not just 3 sons or 4 sons from one mother. 4 different sisters, each had a boy, right? But Sipora, Shemola Rishona, the first sister of sister number 1 had a child, gave bris, Macy died. Shnia, the second sister, had a boy, and he died also after the bris of Mace. Shlishis, third one, and he died. Revius, when it came to the 4th sister, had a child too. She was now concerned because her 3 sisters each buried a child. She came from Shmuel. Ultimately, don't malif her because you have a chazaka now. So what do you see? It's Mashram Shmuel holds you have 3. Says who says maybe that was the story. The story was they came with the 4th sister and don't do it. Maybe had they come with the 3rd sister, he would also said don't do it. So you can't prevent him. So what's Rav Shapiro telling us the story that this happened to Rabbi Yochanan? He's telling us, he's trying to tell us a chiddush over here that Shmuel says only 3 times is a chazaka, not 4. He says no, maybe he really holds that 2 times would have been a chazaka. Maybe the chiddush over there is that sisters also make a chazaka. Chazaka is not just the same mother with 3 sons, 1, 2, 3. It's 3 or 4 or 2 or 3 or 4 different sisters also constitute a chazaka. Maybe that's the chiddush. Amarava. So it's not clear. The Gemara sort of slugs that up. It's not clear what the machlokes is, but at the end of the day, that is the machlok. Shmuel says 3 times a chazaka. Rebbe says 2 times a chazaka. Rabbi, once you say that sisters make a chazaka, if you have, let's say, 2 sisters have epilepsy, or their 2 sisters have leprosy, so don't marry the 3rd sister because she's probably inclined to get that as well. Buddha's chazik plus zimni. Only if it's so. Here he says again. Here the Gemara is not saying. Rabbi says if you hold like Shmuel, the chazak is 3 times. If 3 sisters all develop leprosy or epilepsy or some other disease, don't marry the 4th one. My happy level. What's the halach at the end of the day? Yitzchak can't marry this role. There's a story in Rabbi Yochanan the Knishta Demon in the shul in Ma'on, that city. On Yom Kippur Shchayos b'Shabbos. Listen to this. Yom Kippur came out on Shabbos, and there was a bris. My bris was also on Shabbos. On Yom Kippur. My bris was on Yom Kippur, yeah. But here is Shabbos and Yom Kippur. Here's the Demon. Yom Kippur Shchayos b'Shabbos. Umala Rishon, and what do you have over there? There were different sisters. The first sister had buried her son, Umala Rishon Mace, she a Mace, and now they came up with a 3rd sister, had a baby, was bris supposed to be on Yom Kippur. And the Shaila came before Rabbi Yochanan said, he Mace. A Shlishas Balafon came for him. Amarlah, Rabbi Yochanan said, Mal the kid. Why? Because 2 times wasn't the chazaka. You have 2 sisters might have time, but Mal the kid. Amarlah Abaya, so you see from over here. What happened? So number 1, you see that the chazaka was even for sisters. But number 2, he's talking about even for sisters, the child was there. But he said, he passed in like Shmuel. He says over here that he went like Shmuel. Here's another story indicating Shmuel held that you need a chazaka 3 times. They go Mal. Amalei Abaya, Chazi, listen, be careful. Look what you're doing. The Kashar Sisur Vasakanta, there's 2 problems over here. If the child should not get a milah, if the halach would be that chazak is 2 times, and therefore this child should not be circumcised on Yom Kippur, there's 2 involved things. Number 1, it's a danger for the child, because if the chazak is really 2, and number 2, you're not allowed to mechal Yom Kippur. It's Shabbos and Yom Kippur. You can't be mechal Yom Kippur. If there's not a mitzvah to do the milah, you can't do it on Yom Kippur. So you're mater and isser on Yom Kippur, and it's a sakana. Okay, that's what he said. But still, samach al Abaya. Even though Abaya said, "Be careful," Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef related the story, and Rabbi Yochanan had paskin that go ahead and do the milah on Yom Kippur because 2 times is not a chazaka. And Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef was related the story. Abaya told him, "Be careful what you're doing." But still, Abaya relied on this Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef. And he himself went and married a woman, Bazal Nasba Lachuma Barsa de Isi, Braid Rav Yitzchak. He himself married a woman, Chuma, that was her name, the daughter of Isi Bar Rav Yitzchak, Braid Rav Yehuda, the son of Rav Yehuda. The Nasba, And this lady had already been married prior by Rachva de Kumpadisa, V'shacham, and he died. Rachva had died. And Rav Yitzchak Braid, the Rabbi had married her also, V'shacham, and he died. And now Abaye married her, V'shacham, and he also died. In other words, he married her based on the idea that a chazak 2 times is not a chazaka. If a woman buried 2 husbands, you could still marry her. Abaye relied on that and married her, and he died too. Well, maybe he died. We'll talk about the halach at the end of the Shiur. Amar Rava, would somebody have done this to himself? In other words, Abaye questioned the whole thing. He said to Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef, listen, be careful with Yochanan's psak you're quoting, because on Yom Kippur that could have been a real problem. It's both a sakana for the child, and if you're over an issue of mouthing a kid who shouldn't be mouthed on Yom Kippur. So is it somebody who does who did this and in other words, he relied on the fact that a chazak is only 3 times, not 2 times, and he himself married a woman who had buried 2 husbands, and he eventually died too. But he himself said, Avin, if you hear Allah from Avin in the name of Yochanan, Samcha, you can rely on him. Yitzchak Sumka, Yitzchak the redheaded, or Yitzchak Bar Yosef, Labar Samcha. Why? You can't rely on him because Avin Yeshna B'Chazara. Avin was always by Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Yochanan paskin one way today, and a week later he paskin something else. Avin would have heard about it because he was always in the yeshiva with Rabbi Yochanan. Yitzchak Sumka B'Chazara, he wasn't there. In other words, that he wasn't always around. He relied on Yitzchak Bar Yosef to say that Rabbi Yochanan held that a chazak is only 3 times, not 2 times, and therefore you can mal the kid on Yom Kippur and you can get married to a woman who buried 2 husbands already. But this Rabbi Yitzchak Simcha is relying on Rabbi Yochanan. Maybe Rabbi Yochanan retracted his opinion and he didn't hear about it, so it's hard to rely on that. And as well, also, they're arguing about Mila. Whether a chazak is 2 times, they argue about marriage. Maybe marriage is different. Mila, 2 kids died already. Be careful. Maybe be careful after 2 times. Be careful 3 times. Maybe marriage is different. Gemara says, no, the same as machlokes, Batani we learned. This is L'Rishon Meis, L'Sheni Umeis, L'Shishi Lo Tanasi, Div Rebbe. Here we see the machlokes in favor. Our Mishnah is mashma like Rebbe, because Mishnah says, if you got divorced from the first one, you can marry a second one. Doesn't talk about a third one. Here the Bryce is in favor. Rebbe says, don't marry a 3rd time. 2 times is already, she's a killer. You could marry the 3rd time. You need 3 times to establish her as a katlanit. So Bishlama, okay, so the Gemara comes out pretty much, the proof could be slightly shlagya, but here we have a brisa indicating the machlokas is that Rebbe holds 2 times, Shmuel holds 3 times. Bishlama gabi mila ika mishpacha the rafi dami vika mishpacha the kavadami. I understand the idea of chazaka by a hemophiliac family or children who die from circumcision. Why? Because they can understand there are families that they have thinner blood. They don't coagulate. The blood doesn't coagulate. I can understand, but it's a genetic thing, right? That their blood is like soft or loose or whatever, meaning that it doesn't coagulate. So I understand that. So once it's established that 2 times, according to Rebbe, 3 times according to Leo, as a chazaka, be careful, don't mal the kids anymore. Obviously, if the kid was, the kid wouldn't be able to eat, let's say truma or whatever, he wouldn't be able to eat carbon pesach kids. All right, fine, that would be you couldn't do the avodah or whatever. So you learn those things, but nothing you could do. You can't kill the guy. I don't assume my time. What's about marriage? What's the issue by marriage? If you're married 2 times or 3 times, if she killed 2 husbands, or she buried 2 husbands or 3 husbands, what does that have to do? What does his life have to do with her? I mean, I understand Mila is a physical thing. He's a bleeder. You can't don't kill the kid. But what does a man's death have to do with his wife? Okay, don't answer that. Ellen Asuin, my time, right? What's the reason I'm Asuin? Malay, Mordechai Rashi, Hochim Ravimi, Magrani says Mishmei de Ravuna, Mayan Goram. In other words, her source, that when they have physical contact, when they have intimate contact, that could cause them to get sick. It could be something else. She could be sick in some way. Mayan Goram. Rashi Amar Mazel Goram, that's her mazel. It's her mazel. She had bad luck. She's a husband killer. My benai, what's the difference? The irsame. So the manaf community, let's say they were only engaged and he died. Let's say he got engaged to a woman, right? And she kept killing her fiancés. She never married them, right? So if you say mazel garam, okay, so even if she was only engaged, she's still considered a killer. But if you say mayan garam, it was their intimacy that caused him to get sick. Well, they weren't intimate yet because they were only engaged. So there would be an afkamina. If you hold the reason is because of intimacy and they didn't have any intimacy, then that doesn't count. He fell off a tree. He was never sick. he was climbing on a ladder and he fell off the ladder. If you say that it's the intimacy caused it, so there's some disease caused it. I don't know, whatever you call some sexually transmitted disease caused that. But if it's because he fell off a tree and died, it had nothing to do with that. But if it's because of mazel, could have been mazel anyway. Some say mazel, some say mayan garim. Lamaisa. Yeah, so okay, let's just finish up. Amalei Rav Yosef berei the Rabba said to Rabba, I'll tell you I have a little problem. Boy, I asked Rav Yosef halacha Rebbe. Is halacha like Rebbe that 2 times the chazak normally end? He said, yeah, the halacha is like Rebbe. Halacha is halacha like Shmuel normally end? He says, yeah, the halacha is like Shmuel. Achubi, is he making fun of me? Or he telling me the halacha is like one, halacha like that? Amalei lo stami. What happens is these mishnayos are stam. They're anonymous mishnahs. Some say smash with 2 times the chazaka, sometimes 3 times the chazaka. When he told you the halacha is like Rebbe and it depends on the case. Nisuin and Malchus, when it comes to marriage and Malchus, we'll talk about the case of Malchus, is there you are like Rebbe 2 times is a chazaka, right? Vestos, a veses, that a woman has a regular period. The shor amue, remember shor tam is less than 3 times. Shor amue is 3 times. There is from Shmuel, the chazaka is 3 times. In other words, certain things the chazaka is 2 times, certain things the chazaka is 3 times. Nisuin had amr. Marriage, like we said, that what? We said Nisuin is like Rebbe. If she was married twice and he died, then she's a killer. You shouldn't marry a 3rd time. Now you find that women do marry more times. So the rabbis say it all depends. There's different circumstances. One guy died of cancer, one guy died of a heart attack, one guy was killed in a car accident. Not the same issues. So that sounds more like Mayan garments living together. She gave him some disease. If they died from different causes, then maybe it doesn't problem unless you hold mazel garb. But today we're not makbid about that. Apparently, you find that women marry. It doesn't have to be Zsha Gabor. Even Jewish women also. She was also Jewish. Married many Jewish. Everybody's Jewish, right? Yeah, yeah. Whatever. Anyway, they all have these. Whatever it was today, people find heterim to get married multiple times, and okay. So in Nisuin, we said like Rebbe 2 times. That's it. Malchus, the time Misha look of a shana, if a person did a certain sin for which he got Malchus, and a second time. Bezin comes to skip. If he did it, that's already a chazaka. If he repeated a second time, it's a chazaka. And if he now does it a 3rd time, Rashi says they kill him. Because he's a repeat offender. And a repeat offender, they put him into they put him in a jail or in a box, and they starve him. And then they give him barley. Achikis until his stomach bursts, because 2 times is a chazaka already. Rashi says 2 times. Im chazer b'chat the 3rd time. Achskin Mashiach betrays him the shalaka. In other words, if he got Malchus 2 times for the same sin, and he still he's like a chazaka that he's now a sinner for this, and now if he does it a 3rd time, we just kill him. Vestos, the one about says most women don't have a vestos kavur. In other words, they don't see on the exact same day each month. They don't have their period, but there are women who do. There is a minority of women who do. What's kaveh? And like a vestos actually she's got to see it 3 times. In other words, every month she sees on the exact same day 3 times consecutively. That's a chazaka. 2 times is not a chazaka. Also, let's say she had a vestus kavua. She always saw at the same time, and then 1 month, 2 months, let's say in the 4th and 5th month, she didn't have it on that day. That doesn't take her. She's still considered a vestus kavua until there were 3 times in which she didn't have a vestus kavua. So when it comes to vestus, both for establishing a vestus and for dismissing the vestus, it's got to be 3 times. Shor moed. They have to give testimony about the shore that he gored 3 times. 3 times make us a chazaka. So for Veses and for Shor Amuy 3 times. For marriage and for Malchus 2 times. That's what Rabbi Yosef paskin in terms of the chazaka. But it's the famous machlokas throughout Shas. What makes a chazaka? 2 times like Rebbe or 3 times like Shimon Gamliel? They don't make a difference, right, between the Nisuin and Malchus on the one hand and Festus and Shomur on the other hand. Each one, Rebbe says the chazaka is always 2 times. Shmuel says the chazaka is always 3 times. But in terms of our psak, we can make that difference. Have a good day, everybody. See you tomorrow. Kol tov.
What happens if the circumstances for the person's death? In other words, this woman is married, but she's a killer, right?
Right.
But one guy got shot.
Right. That's exactly what I said. If it's 3 today, if a guy got shot, one guy had an accident, one guy had cancer, so they're makel with that today. That's what we're makel with.